and today we're going to be reviewing the BAUER 1918C-B 20-volt stick light. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot, and for the most part it's a pretty good showing. The battery itself will lock into place nice and securely, and there is next to no looseness or play to speak of, so all the tolerances are fairly tight here, and you won't have any issues with power being interrupted to the light or the battery falling free, so those are all good things. I would like to have seen the slide be a little bit smoother. It definitely gets caught up and it can become misaligned, and it just isn't overall the best experience in the world, but that's a pretty small complaint. It does take a little bit more effort than I personally would like to see to slide the battery into place, but you know, it is what it is, and it's good enough for a budget tool, so no real complaints there. So as far as I'm concerned, the battery slot on this tool is perfectly acceptable, and of course runtime will depend on what size battery you are using and, well, what setting you are using it on. So yeah, moving on. Okay, next up we have a strap point, and this is a nice feature to have, but there is no strap that is provided in the packaging, so you will have to, well, get your own. But that is to be expected with a tool at this price point. So this is a nice feature to have, but just remember to pick up a strap if you intend on using this. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the grip, and the grip on this particular light is good enough, but it's not perfect. For the most part, it's a pretty good showing. The placement of the buttons are good, the angle of the grip is fine, and for the most part, the texturized surfaces are fairly decent as well. My real problem is just how thin the rubberized texture is and how hard it is. There really doesn't feel to be that much of a difference in between just grasping the plastic of the light and grabbing the rubberized texture. There's a little bit of a difference, but it's very hard and it's very stiff, and it just doesn't give me the same amount of reassurance as some other lights on the market or some other brands on the market can provide on their tools. Like I said, this is a budget light though, so you know, it is to be expected that they do have to cut corners in some areas, but you know, the rubberized texture is, you know, pretty hard on this particular light, so I wouldn't expect this to be the most comfortable light to hold for long periods of time. But, you know, it is fairly lightweight, so it's not going to be that big of an issue. And of course, since it's a light, you're not going to have to deal with any sorts of vibrations. So, you know, it's not the biggest deal in the world. And quite honestly, you know, it's good enough. So, at the end of the day, I think it's an acceptable performance, but I do kind of wish that the rubberized texture was a little bit more, you know, thick or a little bit softer. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the on-off switch or trigger, and for the most part it's a pretty simple design. It's a simple cycle through switch, and your first mode when you first press the switch is going to be your high mode, followed by your, you know, lower mode, and then followed by the off position. So you basically have two different modes, high and low, which is perfectly fine for me. You know, I usually like a maximum of 3 modes, but 2 modes works just fine for me in most scenarios, so quite frankly, I'm perfectly satisfied with the switch on this particular light. Holding the switch for a long period of time will do absolutely nothing, and so quite frankly, you know, it's about as basic as you can get, but, you know, it's good enough. I guess the more basic thing would be to only have a single mode, but, you know, this does have 2 modes. And I do think it does a fine job on, you know, its design and layout. This cover that goes over the switch is fairly tough feeling, and it doesn't feel like it's going to rip or get caught on things because of how flat and narrow it is, so I think it's a pretty good showing. So as far as I'm concerned, the trigger on this light is perfectly acceptable. Okay, next up we have the hinge, and it's a hinge. There are 7 positive positions, and once the light is in each of those positions, the light does a fairly good job at staying put, and it doesn't, you know, easily go into a different position unless you really shake the light. So the positive positions on this light are fairly good. My main issue with this hinge, however, is the fact that you are unable to point the light upward at all. You're basically relegated to only be able to point the light directly forward, and this can be a major problem if you are, well, trying to work on something above your head. Let's say you're underneath a vehicle. And so this is definitely a major downside of this particular product. I definitely think this product would be more interesting and far more recommendable if it had any ability whatsoever to be able to, well, have the light pointed upward. There are other lights that BAUER makes that you will be able to point upward, but I'm definitely disappointed that this particular light is unable to provide any illumination basically, you know, upward. So definitely a bit of a downside and probably a deal breaker for quite a few people if you are looking at this particular light to, well, work on a vehicle with. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the LED panel, and the LED panel for the most part is decent enough. It produces a fairly even white light, and it's not too cold or not too warm. Quite frankly, it's perfectly acceptable. Now, the LED beads on this particular light, there are 12 of them, have an interesting way of, well, basically going from high power mode to low power mode, and that would be that, well, they basically half of them turn off when you go to the lower power mode. So when you're in low power mode, you only have six LED beads illuminated. On a lot of different power tool lights on the market, what happens is basically when you have it on full power and then go to a power saving mode, the LED beads will just get dimmer. This allows them to burn at the same rate and basically means that you're not going to have any sorts of issues with certain LED beads burning out faster than other LED beads, because they theoretically should burn out all around the same, you know, in about the same amount of time, unless you have a, well, defective LED bead, which does happen. But, you know, this is an interesting approach, but it does go to show that they're not using the highest quality of LED beads on the market. So just something to be aware of. There really isn't anything super negative with this particular design or the, you know, philosophy behind this, but for me personally, I do prefer the LED beads that dim in brightness rather than, well, just turn off completely. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. And last but not least, we have the hang hook, and it's good enough, but I definitely wouldn't trust it with anything larger than a 4 amp hour battery, just because I don't think it's going to necessarily provide you with the right amount of balance. And how they're basically securing it into the tool is with a, well, rubber O-ring. So quite frankly, it's a little bit on the shoddy side when it comes to its overall design. It's definitely thinner than on some of the competition lights that have a similar, you know, hang hook, and I don't think it's going to be 2x4 capable if you're looking to have it hang evenly. So quite frankly, the hang hook, while it is nice to have it, it definitely isn't the highest quality hook in the world. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have, well, what the tool is like in use. And I have a little bit of a confession here. I didn't end up finishing the review on the tool, and I wasn't able to test to see if it would overheat or had any sort of malfunctions or issues, because, well, it had an issue. It stopped working while it was sitting in the desk in front of me, and now it won't turn on regardless of what kind of battery I use in it. So it basically burned itself out as far as I'm concerned. The light wasn't dropped, it wasn't thrown, it wasn't tipped over, it was just sitting on the desk in front of me and stopped working, with very light use and within 2 weeks of it being purchased. So unfortunately, that's not a good indication of this tool's overall durability and long-lasting capacity. You know, it is just a little bit disappointing when a product that you have high hopes for just, well, basically fizzles out on its own without any sort of, you know, problem from the user. Now, with that being said, it could just be a lemon, and I might have just gotten extremely unlucky and, you know, bought one to review and then found out that it was crap. But, you know, I don't really have much of an interest in reviewing it in the future after this incident, just because, well, I've had similar issues with other Harbor Freight products, and I just don't want to waste the time on reviewing a second copy of the light. So it is what it is. Now, just as a quick comparison against this light versus a couple other lights, I have it set up in front of a shipping container, which is about 20 feet away. It's a 40-foot shipping container, and it's doing an okay job at this range at illuminating the shipping container. You can definitely see it, but it's definitely not something I would work by, but that's not really the intended purpose for a light like this. The smaller 12 skill light that you can see in the video is also putting out about the same amount of lumens. I think it's actually a tad bit brighter, but they're very comparable. I do like the smaller skill light a little bit more because it's more compact and you can actually aim the light upward. So I do think those are pros that are going for the skill light. The larger Bauer light, unfortunately, you can't aim the light upward at all, so it's not going to be useful for, well, when you're working underneath anything whatsoever. The skill light, the Bauer light does have a hook and a strap point, which is something that the smaller skill light does not have. So, you know, neither one of them is perfect, but I think the downside of this skill is much less. And the light I just turned on is going to be the 900 lumen Ryobi light, which is basically 3 times the amount of power that the Bauer can produce. And you could definitely tell that by just how well it illuminated the side of the shipping container. And then the last and final light is going to be the larger skill light, which produces 600 lumens, which is about double the amount of lumens that the Bauer light can produce. So, you know, at the end of the day, if I was trying to illuminate a large work area, the Ryobi would probably be my go-to light if I didn't have a bigger light. And if I was working underneath the vehicle, it would either be the longer skill light or the shorter skill light, because I can angle both of those up, and the larger skill light has magnets, so I can place it in different areas and be able to rotate the head of the light, which makes it a very versatile light. I really like that bigger skill light. Now, either one of these smaller lights is going to work great for just a handheld inspection light, as long as it doesn't malfunction on you. I've had the smaller skill light for over a year at this point, and they've both I've got two of them, and they both work great. I've got one in my shop and I've got one in my house, and they both work great. The BAUER light I've had for 2 weeks, and it died on me already. So, like I said earlier, just not a great indication of its overall capacity for long-term usability, to put it fancily, which isn't a word, but you get the point. Now, I do think that they both work decently. They both put out good amount of light at close quarters. They both have a good neutral color, so that you can easily tell if there's staining or if there's some sort of an issue going on, and you don't have to deal with the colors being washed out. But like I said earlier, for my own personal preferences, I definitely prefer the smaller skill light over the larger light, just because of its capability of being able to have the LED panel pointed upward. So with that being said, let's go ahead and recap with the pros and cons. And the first pro is 20 volts. 20 volts means that this will work with all your BAUER 20 volt batteries, and you can adapt batteries over from different brands if you so choose to. Just remember, you do that at your own risk. And the next pro would be price. This light is very affordable, coming in at under $20. So at the end of the day, this is a very affordable light at a good price point. Maybe. Hook. The hanging hook can come in handy in different situations. It's definitely not the most robust hook I've ever seen, but at least it has one. 2 modes. I really do prefer lights that don't have 50 gazillion different modes, and 2 modes is just about perfect for me. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Strap point. The strap point is a very useful feature on this particular light. As a matter of fact, it's something that this 12 volt light that I like better than the Skill does not have. So the fact that this has it means that, well, that's a point in its favor. Color of the light. I really do not like the lights that have too warm of a temperature or too cool of a temperature. The color temperature on this light is very white, and that's just about perfect for me. So in my opinion, this is a pro. And the first con would be durability, or better said, a lack of durability. Overall, the build quality of the plastic is very cheap. The components that hold it together are not the best, and quite frankly, mine has already died after only about 35 to 40 minutes of use. And, it wasn't dropped, it wasn't thrown, it wasn't knocked over, it was used for about 40 minutes, and it's already dead. So quite frankly, the durability is not great for this particular light. Limited tilt range. Overall, the tilt range on this particular light is very, well, poor. You can't angle it up at all, and the best you can do is, well, having it shine straight forward, which works fine if you're using it as an inspection light, but if you're using it as a light to work underneath your vehicle, well, quite frankly, it's just not a great option in that case. And last but not least, it's a little bit on the dim side. There are definitely far brighter lights on the market that will give you a much better performance in the same, well, form factor. So in my opinion, this is a bit of a con. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular light. I really wanted to like this light. I think it has a good form factor. I think the light that it produces is good. And I think the price was right. Unfortunately, the build quality just wasn't there, and mine stopped working after 2 weeks of light use. It could be mine's defective, but I kind of doubt it. I've had similar issues with other Harbor Freight products, not particularly in the BAUER lineup, but some of their other products. And unfortunately, this just seems to be kind of the routine with this particular light. If I remember right, when this light was first released, it was more expensive, and then over time it became cheaper, and cheaper. And now we're at the point where it's below $20. So that something tells me that this could actually be a fairly common issue with this particular product. I could be completely wrong about that, but after only 2 weeks of light use, there just really isn't any sort of an excuse for this light to not work anymore. So with that being said, I really can't recommend this particular light unless you want to take a chance on it and you don't mind wasting 20 bucks. But for me personally, I do not recommend this particular light at this moment in time. Maybe if they come out with a newer model, I'll take a look at that. But as it stands right now, I think you'd be much better getting the smaller BAUER, folding light, as long as you don't need to use it for a handheld, inspection job. If you need an inspection light, there are other lights on the market that are going to be far higher quality than this particular light. So with that being said, thank you for watching, and we will see you all next time. God bless.